All right, folks, welcome. My name is Amy Thompson. I am the College and Career Counselor here at Hillsborough High School. I'm so excited to welcome you to what is really our kickoff event for the college application process for our class of 2026. We're really excited to get to work with this group so closely as we head through the remainder of the junior year and into the senior year next year. Tonight's presentation is perhaps going to be a little bit overwhelming. I'll warn you now for those that are new to the process. Just know that this presentation is going to be recorded. So if you need to walk away at any time, or frankly, your brain kind of hits overload and you just need to come back to it later for things that you feel like you may have missed, not a problem. Every presentation that we do is recorded and is posted on YouTube within a few days of the event. You'll always get a link by email once it's posted as well. Throughout this presentation, we will also be doing Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, you have that Q&A section where you can ask questions if you're unsure throughout. I'll be doing the presentation, but our wonderful counselors are here as well. Our school counselors will be in the background answering your questions throughout the evening. So if you do have something, you can feel free to pop it down there. One other thing I want to let you know is that if you want to follow along, you're looking for this presentation that I'm giving. If you go back to the email that you used to get the link to come into this Zoom, you'll see that there is a link there where the presentation is posted. It's available in kind of presentation mode, linked on Canva, or you can download it as a PDF if you prefer. So if you want to follow along at home and that's easier for you, you can do that. So with no further delay, I'm going to go ahead and have our counselors kind of go around the virtual room and introduce themselves. We do have one counselor who had a family emergency, was unable to make it tonight, Miss Idris. And Miss Idris's last names for the class of 2026 is G-U-E through K-A-N. And I will pass it on to Miss Housel.
Hi, I'm Laura Housel, and my student caseload is letters A through B-R-A.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jade Akinrolavu. My caseload is B-R-E to D-E-F.
Hi, everyone. I'm Toby Flagg, and my caseload is D-R-S to G-R-O.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jaleesa Williamson. My caseload is K-A-O to L-O-P.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Sayer, and my student caseload is L-O-W through O-L-I.
Good evening, everyone. My caseload is O-R-O to R-U-F.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Regetz, and my caseload is R-U-I to S-H-A.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Johnston, and my junior caseload is
Hello, everyone. My name is Aziza Hassan, and my junior caseload is TIG all the way to the end of the.
All right, folks. So our counselors are going to go ahead and kind of pop off and be in the background for the rest of the presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and get us all set up. I do have a slightly different display than usual, so hopefully I get it right the first time. I kind of feel like it's like 2020 again over here. And we should be good to go. Okay. So this evening, just a kind of quick overview. This is what we'll be going over kind of in the order of the presentation. You can get an idea of what we're going to be covering when, so that you can kind of time any step outs that you need to do. And before we get into things, I just wanted to kind of reassure you. I feel like, especially if this is your first time and your first child that's going through the process, you might be feeling really overwhelmed at what's to come. Perhaps you've been talking to others in the community or other friends that you have or what you see in the media. I want to reassure you that this does not have to be a hugely overwhelming process. We do support students and families as we go through this process. And I feel like it really can be manageable and even moderately enjoyable as you go through this process. And it's certainly an exciting time for all students that are going through this. In terms of supporting your students, I wanted to give you an idea about what's to come. What are some of the kind of programming things that we do with students and families over the time? You can see that the first thing that we're really going to be doing is after this evening, it's our kind of kickoff celebration here. Next week, we're jumping right in with the students, and counselors will be doing junior group meetings with your students. So definitely encourage your students to check their emails and show up for those junior groups, because that's where we'll be, and we'll be waiting for them to go over this same type of content, but with a little bit more of a student skew to it. And this kind of lays out for you what else we have going on for the rest of this year and into the early part of next year. In addition to those programs, kind of large scale programs, there's a lot of other ways that we communicate with families throughout this process, and a lot of different kinds of resources that families can use. So these are kind of some of the key ones that are there. There's a ton of information on the College and Career Counseling website. That's where you find that link in the email that I sent you with the Zoom info. It's linked in there, so you can hop to it right from there. And also the score and the YouTube are also linked right from there. I do post pretty actively on social media, probably more so on Instagram than Facebook, but I try, and do communicate with students on there as well and support them throughout the process using social media, because we're meeting them where it's at, right? So let's go ahead, and what you'll find as you go kind of hear from me is that I'm kind of a big data nerd. So one of the things I like to do is to kind of give you the data so that you're kind of understanding the context of what's going on in terms of college admissions. And I think it's important to kind of think about the trends and just sort of have some context as to what the world of college admissions looks like in really 2025, which I will say is very different from when I entered this profession in like 2006 now, almost 20 years. It's a very different world than it was. And it's certainly a very different world than when we as adults applied to college. I sat at the kitchen table with a typewriter. There was no email way back then, right? So it seems crazy, but it's a very different process now. So one of the things that's important to know is that for the class of 2026, SAT scores are probably still not going to be required by most schools, but we may see some more start to reinstate it for this class. It's just a little bit too early to know what's going on with every school yet. Lots of them are going to reevaluate that at the conclusion of this year, and we'll have a better plan. So I'll address that when we talk about testing a little bit later. I do feel like I'm seeing that students need to do more work per application. Colleges are relying on the students to increasingly, I feel like, to self-report their grades, to check their portals, to do little extra requirements, to write more essays, things like that. So while some schools are just kind of a quick and easy submit, we send the transcript and that's it, I'm finding that other schools, students need to do a lot more follow-up work. And that's important to keep in mind as we kind of look into how many applications is a student doing, what's realistic in terms of workload for them. In general, I think what you'll find at many colleges, especially, I feel like larger state universities, as well as more selective institutions, you're going to find that a lot of their application numbers are up. A lot of that has to do with students applying to more colleges than they used to. And part of that is because SATs and ACTs aren't required. So students are kind of casting a wider net. So it all kind of snowballs together a little bit. It has resulted in applications numbers being up. Most schools are still looking for the same numbers of bodies on campus, though. And so what that means is that's how we get to places that are more selective than they once were, right? Because we've got a larger number of applicants, the same number of bodies on campus, more people are getting denied, right? But we can't deny them all because kids are applying to more schools. So we don't know who's going to come. So what do they wind up doing? They do something called defer, which means say, hey, we'll look at your application again a little bit later. And they do a lot of waitlisting. And you might have heard a lot about that in the news or from friends' kids and things like that. It's very common now for students to be placed on one or more wait lists. And that kind of drags that process out a little bit longer into the end of senior year than any of us would really like. Also seeing more admits for alternate campuses. So instead of the main campus of a large flagship university, I'm seeing more admits to other campuses. Penn State University is very popular for us, but I would say a greater percentage of students are admitted to Harrisburg and Erie and all of the other campuses of the Penn State system than to the main campus in University Park. I'm also seeing more admits for spring. That's very popular at University of Maryland, and also some summer admits. That's popular at Penn State University Park. Also seeing, unfortunately, costs are continuing to go up. In terms of bringing it down to the Hillsborough level, I do feel like I'm starting to see more of our students concentrating on, well, one community college, but also in-state public institutions, as well as, institutions that are offering them scholarship dollars. I want to give you a little bit of context about last year's class, which can help students kind of contextualize where they are in terms of like a Hillsborough applicant pool. There's kind of some stats about last year's class. We had about 565 graduates last year, 73% to four-year college. That's around average for us. I feel like we fluctuate between about 71 and 75, but these numbers are pretty typical. You'll see the average weighted and unweighted GPA for 2- and 4-year college applicants from the class of 2024. If we knock that down and we're only looking at students who wound up at 4-year schools, those numbers go up to about a 95 on the weighted side and an 89 and change on the unweighted side. Our students do apply widely, 411 different colleges. They really are looking all over the place. From Maine out to Hawaii and even overseas. We do have students who also submit a lot of applications. Last year, we processed 4,623 of them, which is a lot. On average, students submit about 9 applications. We'll talk a little bit more later about kind of a balanced list, and when we do see that number get bigger, it can get pretty large. I try to encourage students to really try to keep that number down below 20. I generally find that families and students that kind of move into the larger their number, they tend to not have more admits. They tend to get more denies and more wait lists in a lot of cases, or they're just kind of applying blindly to schools that they know nothing about. It winds up being kind of an unfocused process for them, and they wind up probably at a place that they could have gone to with 10 applications. What we see in the center there is that I've kind of given you an idea, and you're not going to know a lot about these terms right now, many of you, if it's your first time, but how our students submit applications. And I show this because one of the first things I tend to hear from schools as kids is, I need to find an ED school. I have to ED somewhere. And what ED is it's early decision. And students who apply early decision to a school are basically binding themselves to their school. They're saying, I love you so much, I want to come there. And they send in their application, and they can only apply to one like this in the early fall. And if they get into that school, their process is done. They're going there, it's a binding agreement, and that's kind of the end of it. And what I start to hear, not as much in late this year, but definitely over the summer, and as soon as they get back in the fall, is they're searching. Which of these schools should I ED to? Where should I ED? And I think sometimes that's because they're maybe a little bit unclear, and they think like everybody's applying this way. And I kind of want to show them that in terms of all the applications we're sending out, we had 71 students last year apply early decision in round 1. That is 1.5% of the total number of applications we sent out. So really, really small. And of that 71, about 25% of them got into their ED school. So it's not nearly as big of a thing as students think it is. So, it's just kind of just to give them some context that, it's not always the words that you're hearing in the classroom, because just what students are talking about doesn't always reflect the reality of the whole picture. So this is what kind of does. For those of us, though, that are, kind of my age, not that much, of a different age from me, early action wasn't a thing then. When I started in college admissions 20 years ago, everybody was submitting their applications in January, and only like a small percentage of people did it earlier. Things are kind of different now. You'll see half of the applications that our students do are early action, early decision, things along those lines, which means that they're applying really November 1st and earlier. So this process has moved up a lot over the years. Now, just to give you a little bit of idea of where our students are going, these are some of our most popular schools. We do have a big group at Raritan Valley, which is not surprising, 112 last year. That number has been creeping up. It used to be under 100. Rutgers, we're up to 81, not surprising. It's our most popular. We used to be in the 60s, then we kind of went to the 90s around COVID times. Now we're settling in around the 80s. This list does vary. Some of these schools are here every year. Others are hot in one year or another. I feel like this year, Indiana University, everybody and their brother is applying there. Had a lot more applications to some other schools like University of Texas and things like that than we have in the past as well. Some schools have previously been hot have kind of dropped off a little bit. I feel like our numbers to University of Delaware might be down a little bit. There are a few other places as well. On the right side, you get an idea of some of where our students attended this year that were more selective institutions. And again, this is last year's graduating class. Now, what about this year's class, the 2025ers? We have some of them who have decisions. Actually, we have a lot of decisions out there already. On the left side there, you can see some of our early decisions. So these are done and dusted. That's where these kids are going. We've got a couple going to Brown already, Northwestern, University of Chicago. TCNJ was extremely popular for early decision this year. And we have 14 students already committed to go to TCNJ this year. That's really big for us. That's up a lot over previous years. On the right side, you can get an idea of where else students are already accepted to. And they're receiving more acceptances every day. There were some big decision releases going on this month that the seniors are really excited about. All right, so now you have a little bit of idea about kind of what goes on within Hillsborough. Let's talk about that college search a little bit. So one of the things that I think is really hard and things I hear from families and students is like, how do I get started? And I think the really important thing is that the first thing they need to do is really kind of think about themselves, who they are and what they're truly looking for in a college. So put aside the names of the colleges. Like, let's not think about kind of the bumper stickers or who's on the NCAA tournament bracket or anything like that, or in any rankings publications. Let's think about who I am as a core. Do I flourish in our larger classroom or smaller classroom? Do I want to try living out in the city, or am I looking for a true campus environment? Do I see myself going to kind of a rah-rah school? So a school with maybe a big football program where I'm going to be tailgating and, there's fraternities and sororities, and that's kind of the way that school is structured in terms of social life. So think about that a little bit. And I like to think of there kind of being three big components, and all of them are present at some level for each student, but the size of the pie, I would say, varies depending upon the student. For some, finances are the biggest piece of the puzzle, and that's okay. For others, it's not as significant as the other parts. What is always going to be significant, though, I feel like, is the core of the academics, which is what areas is a student interested in academically. And it is okay if they don't know exactly what they want to major in. If you look at a college major list, you're going to find so many things on there, one, that didn't used to exist at all, but two, that a student has had zero exposure to. And those majors all have kids graduating from them. And they're because students discover those things once they get on campus. So I encourage a student, okay, you have some general interest in business, you're kind of creative, maybe you're kind of interested in marketing. Look for schools that offer marketing, advertising, PR, things around kind of new media and social media, all of those types of things, because they're all good possibilities for you. So make sure that the student has programs that you're interested in. Do they have anything special about those programs? Because that's a good reason that a school could hit your list. Maybe they have a combined program that you're interested in that could allow you to go a little bit further. Some particularly special internship or co-op opportunities or overseas opportunities, things like that. That might help differentiate a particular school and have it hit your list. So how can we kind of search for some of this stuff? Some of the things that they can use are SCORE, and I'll show you SCORE in a little bit when we get a little bit further into the presentation. But here are some other resources. I actually really like College Express a lot. When I get on that site, I look at the lists and rankings, and they have some really good ones. They've kind of got, and this is data collected from other school counselors, people that are in education, not rankings based on like a US News type ranking that is like one president ranking another president's college, or things that take into account alumni donations, things like that. That's not what these lists are. So they may be talking about schools with exceptional outcomes in certain major fields, but I also like some of the more social lists there. It'll be like colleges for the quirky kid, colleges for the social butterfly, things like that. Because when I kind of get a sense of what type of kid is, it can help me expand what I'm looking for a little bit and give them some, suggestions of schools that they might not be familiar with, but might be a great match for their personality. Also very popular is our HHS class of 2024 admits by GPA. Every year I put out this little presentation that tells families where last year students were admitted. And then beyond that, it tells them kind of by GPA, what were those admission results. I'm just going to kind of drag it over to my screen over here for a second. And so what you'll see is that it will show you for GPAs between 96 and 99.9, the average number of applications last year was 10. Here's a list of the different places they were accepted, where they were waitlisted, where they were denied, where they're attending. This is always really popular because it helps families to build lists, and it also helps to give you a real idea about where a school might fall for you, how realistic it is going to be in terms of admissions. So I always encourage students to kind of go there. What do students like you in the last year's class? Where did they wind up? Where were they applying? What kinds of decisions were they getting? So that's a really good resource. Once you kind of start to get some together, if you haven't already, I encourage you to start looking at doing some campus visits. The spring is a great time to start doing those campus visits. When I say spring, I kind of mean starting. The spring visits usually start up in like late January at most of the schools up here. If you're going down south, they start a little bit earlier. They're probably already running for the spring term. It's important to know, though, that spring visits really are wrapping up by around like the third or fourth week of April, certainly not really past April, because once we get past April, we're in finals. Those kids are taking finals. They are not giving tours. So if you're looking to get there when kids are on campus, you kind of want to get there by the end of April. If you are looking to do some college visits over break, over spring break, I would encourage you to start to look at those things in the next couple of weeks and book those appointments, because they will fill. A lot of schools get off in the week before or after Easter. And you're also competing a little bit with some admitted students doing visits at that point in time as well. So start taking a look and maybe getting that kind of framed out. I would also start to look at maybe what your summer plans are, and do those include any visits? It's going to be too early to sign up for those tours yet, but you can start to take a look at where you're thinking about going. Do I think summer visits are worth it? I think that a summer visit is better than not visiting at all. Sometimes we're not, time does not allow us to visit schools, all throughout the year, and that's okay. So a summer visit can at least enable you to get on campus. And then students can go back later on. Do I think you need to visit every school on your list? Honestly, I feel like that doesn't happen all the time anymore, or most of the time anymore. I encourage students to kind of visit a representative sample. If you're applying to all big schools, I hope you visited a couple of big schools to make sure that you understand what we're talking about and what that campus environment is going to look like for you. Just to kind of make sure that it is what they think it is. I don't like to see students get through the whole process, then visit schools and realize that they actually don't like anything on their list. And unfortunately, yes, that has happened. There are also virtual visits and things like that, virtual tours on the school website. I also kind of like the college tour, which is very marketing heavy. I'll give you that, but it's on the college tour website and also on Amazon Prime. And they've got I don't know, I feel like they're closing in on 100 different schools that they've toured, and the cinematography is great. And you get to see parts of campus and learn things about schools you're not otherwise going to get to do. Plus, you can do it from your couch and you can fast forward. So that is a good resource as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about SCORE. So what is SCORE? If you got an older kid who came through Hillsborough, they may come through in the time frame of Naviance. So SCORE replaced Naviance. So it is really college and career planning software. And it is how students, well, one, they can learn about schools through SCORE. There's college search functionality. It is how they keep track of their schools, what they're thinking about, where they're planning to apply and where they've applied. It is how they can determine admission likelihood, so they can get an idea about what are my chances of getting into this school. And then as we get into next year, it's how they're actually going to let us know as a counselor that they've applied to schools, that their request teacher letters of recommendation, It'll happen later this year. It's how we send things to schools, materials like transcripts. There's no more envelopes. None of that happens. It all goes through SCORE. And sometimes it's even how they apply to colleges, because SCORE does have its own application, and I'm finding more students are utilizing that application to apply to colleges. It's important to know that they cannot opt out of using SCORE. It's a required part of the process in order to get kind of applications out the door. So let me just drag my little SCORE window over there. For those of you who are not familiar with SCORE, I want to kind of show you what we're looking at. Let me drag over a student view. So this is a student SCORE account. When they log in, they can do career interest searches. This whole page is really dynamic. So this is what it looks like for my fake student. His name is Stu Demo, and his name is Stu every year. Stu has a lot of applications on here, and your child should never have this many on here, but Stu's account gets used a lot. So all the information on here is dynamic, and everything is based on what they've done before, and what they've selected before. So there's a lot of things here that are going to look different for each student that logs in, really. They can do searches here on Discover. So they can come right in here. They can match things based on preferences that they've put in. They can do a search. So if I want to do a really basic search, I can just hit 4-year college, and then I can focus on what I want. So let's say I think I'm going to pick something a little less popular, because if I pick psychology, every school comes up. So I'm going to go with aerospace engineering. I want a 4-year school that's medium sized, and I want it to be within like 500. Is it going to come out? Oh no, I need my starting point. Hillsborough. And I want it to be like a longer drive. And it's going to start popping things up down here, different types of schools, different sizes of schools. The more you put, the more restrictive it's going to be. Aero is not the world's most popular major, but this is the aerospace schools that are within a couple of hours of the Hillsborough campus. And you can see lots of different information here. I'm not going to pick MIT. I'm going to pick Syracuse, because I feel like Syracuse is kind of middle of the road academically in terms of admission. When a student comes here, they can learn more about Syracuse, but they care most about this stuff. They care about the admission stuff. This is the stats that Syracuse has supplied for for everybody that's applying to Syracuse in last year's admission cycle. So their admission rate was 42%. So 42% of the applicants got in, and this was their average SAT and their average GPA. Or average SAT and ACT. GPA is not on here because it varies so much by high school. Everybody computes it differently. We'll talk about ours in a few minutes. You can hit on scattergram there, and you'll start to get Hillsborough specific information. So you'll see for our students, what is the average GPA of a student admitted to Syracuse? What's the average test score? What is the acceptance rate? And you can also specify it. We have it broken down to really like the last 3 or 4 years, which is the most relevant information. And then we can see a chart of who got in and who didn't. And if I had all of my info in here, I can kind of get an idea about where I stand. So let's say my GPA is around a 95, my SAT is running at around 1110. So I'm right around here on the chart. What these boxes are is they represent kind of the average kid, the high of the mid 50%, and the low of the mid 50%. So when a kid's down here, they know it's a little bit more selective for them, a little bit harder for them to get in. If they're up here, they know that they are have higher scores and a higher GPA than most of our applicants, and they're probably in pretty good shape. So that is one thing a student can do. And then they can just, I'm already following, but any school that a student hits into following comes here onto their My Colleges page. Parents from your SCORE accounts, you can also add things here. When you do that, is going to come onto the suggested column. That's where things go when I add things, or their counselors do as well. So students can use those things, they can dismiss them, or they can move them over into their following column. These two columns the students use later on. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about what they can do in SCORE. We're going to kind of go over this stuff with them again when we see them starting next week. So don't feel like you've got to do that, because we're going to take care of it with them. We're going to review everything and get them in there and using SCORE. So now, as they're looking at schools, what are we looking for in terms of numbers? I said before our average is about 9, so I'm kind of going to give you bands here because it makes a lot more sense. I'd say most kids in our school really wind up somewhere between 7 and 12. Some students have very few, and that's okay. I feel like for the most part, that's my recruited athletes who sign really early, people who are applying to schools that are really match schools or likely schools, schools where they were kind of at the top of the heap and they got in early and they loved it and they were done and like they didn't want to apply anywhere else, and that's fine. So they tend to have a low number. I am seeing more and more that are kind of falling into these categories up here. I do find that students who start applying to more selective schools tend to wind up in this 13 to 18 range. I really, really only like to see the students get into this range when we're talking about kind of BAMD programs, audition programs, other things like that. But I am starting to see some other students creep up into that range as well. I do try to remind students that, you know, applying to more highly selective schools doesn't increase your chances of getting into them. So I really encourage students to have a well-constructed list. As I mentioned before, it's a lot of work. They write a lot of essays. When they focus a lot more, I find they do a much better job on their applications, and they tend to have stronger results on the whole than students who have had a more kind of scattershot approach to their application process. All right. Just want to give you an idea about stats for some popular schools for us so that we can start to get an idea about kind of who's getting in from Hillsborough High School. And I want to talk about a couple of these. You'll see up there, Rutgers, not surprisingly, our most popular school. We send over 300 applications there a year. And those of you who have kind of family friends at other, maybe in last year's graduating class, may have heard, hey, Rutgers got a lot more selective. And it did get a lot more selective last year. For last year's class, the average GPA of our students getting in was just over 99. You see my little arrow there. That was up probably about a point to a point and a half over the previous year, which is a really big jump. Nobody else on this list had jumps anywhere near that big. You also see the accept percents down. And when it said down, it was down about 10% for our students over the previous years. And that's because Rutgers started accepting the common application, which means it got a lot easier for people, mostly from out of state, to start applying to the institution. They also had a really nice ranking in US News and World Report, which doesn't hurt, and just kind of overall got more popular. And again, not looking to grow their class, so that made it more selective. One thing that's important to know, though, is I'm saying more selective, but you're still seeing 65% get in. And that's because of the way Rutgers admits students. When you apply to Rutgers New Brunswick, you can apply to up to 3 institutions within New Brunswick. So you can apply to the School of Business, Arts and Sciences, and Environmental and Biological Sciences. And you'll get 3 separate decisions to them. And if you get into any of them, that's considered an accept. And that is different from how some other schools do it. So for instance, when you apply to Penn State University Park, also popular, you only have one chance at their main campus in University Park. So you have to choose. And if that's business, maybe you're applying to accounting, then that's business. Your only backup is starting in the summer is your first backup, or starting on one of the Commonwealth campuses. There's no like, I want to be considered for business, or as a backup, consider me for psychology. That's not a thing there. So they have a one chance of getting in there. And different schools will do that differently. So that's important to know when we start looking at accept rates, how they're not all kind of counting the same thing or counting it in the same way. And that's really important to consider. So don't assume, hey, it's easy to get in. I see their accept rates really high, because it doesn't mean you got into your major. And also when we're talking about out-of-state institutions, you're going to find that it's at many states, it is harder to get in as an out-of-state resident than it is as an in-state resident. So for instance, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of Virginia, University of Texas, Austin, University of Michigan, the California schools, they're all real popular. Their job though is to serve the residents of their own state first. So those students are meant to make up the largest portion of their population, which leaves fewer spots for the out-of-state students. So it's typically more selective for out-of-state students to get into those schools than others. So it's important to take that into account as well when students are looking at statistics. But this kind of gives you an idea, lay of the land about where our students get in, a variety of different kinds of students and at different places in our class as well. So you can see that we do really find homes for all of our students, and different spots are the right place for different students, which is great because there's, a couple thousand schools out there to find for them. So when we're working on these lists, we're encouraging students to have what we call a balanced list. And what we mean by a balanced list is we want to see them have schools at kind of all of these points, schools where they are way above the average. Those places are affordable. They'll get scholarships, maybe accelerated programs, lots of people accepted like you. You're pretty I'd be surprised if you didn't get in. Probables, we probably used to call those safeties, right? Now we go with probables because things happen and we want to leave room for that little margin, that little percentage of chance that it might not happen. I also want to see the bulk of a student's list falling into this match or target range. The average stats looks like that student. There's a good number of students getting in with them, but probably not all of the students getting in with them. These are not the most selective schools out there. So I try to tell students those schools that have like a 15% accept rate really aren't a match for everybody, because the odds just stink no matter how wonderful you are, because they can't take all of those students that are applying there. Then we've got reach schools where the average stats are kind of above where you are, or maybe they only take a small number of students, those highly selective schools, so those 15% type schools, that they're reaches for most people. And then we've got our far reaches, and you can get an idea about who those are. And I like to see students have all of these represented somewhere on their list, again, with the bulk of those really kind of being in that match target range rather. These are the kinds of stats we're looking at, things we're considering as we try to figure out where do these schools fall. So those are the kinds of places students can do a lot of this work on their own. Right within SCORE, they are able to mark, right? When they go to that My Colleges page, they can click on a school, they can mark what they think it is. When I start meeting with students, I'm always looking at that. And I know counselors do as well. They're kind of looking and they're like, I don't think this is as easy as you think it is. I would call this more of a reach school. And sometimes I see a kid's got it marked as a probable. And I'm like, I know that that's not the case. So it's a good opportunity for us to have some conversation and kind of readjust expectations with students. So I encourage them to take some stabs at putting those on there. I do meet with students kind of through the end of this year and then into next year. And we're always looking at those lists and kind of seeing where the holes are. I'll say that most students have a hard time coming up with match schools. Most people can come up with probables. Everybody can come up with reaches and dreams, but it's hard for kids to know like what's really kind of a match. And I do try to explain to them too, it's really kind of a continuum. There are matches that are closer to a probable and there are matches closer to a reach. And that's okay. And we just try to make sure that we've got schools in all of those places as we go through. So as a student goes through this, they might be trying to decide, is kind of 4-year or 2-year, where I want to wind up. And I want to kind of talk about that 2-year piece for a little bit, because we do have about 20% of our students who are going to 2-year college. Obviously, Raritan Valley Community College is most popular for our students. It is the local community college for Somerset County, but we do have students that are going to other community colleges as well. There are lots of different reasons for students to go to community college. It's close, it's cheap in comparison to the cost of 4-year college. Students will save a lot of money by starting at the community college that they could utilize later on for years 3 and 4 at a different institution. Some students are feeling like maybe they're not quite ready for the big change of going to a 4-year school. They may not know what they want to study yet, so they want to kind of suss that out at the community college level while they're taking their general education courses, focus it a little bit more, and then have a better 4-year college search to wind up at the right place later. Sometimes students are really trying to do those general ed courses in a smaller environment. You're talking about an intro to psych class of 20 to 25 versus an intro to psych class at some large institutions of 400 to 500. Those are very different numbers and very different experiences. And it can be helpful for students to get their feet under them in that smaller environment and lay a good base for a college GPA and then move on. Some students want a fresh start academically. They want to kind of start over, rebuild that GPA and have different outcomes later on, and that's okay. I have others who are, coming on in and they want to participate in Raritan Valley's Honors College. They have a fantastic honors college there, very small focused experience where our students have been really successful. The application process to community college is really, really straightforward and easy. It's nothing they need to do in the fall and the springtime. I just sent out my invitation today. We do an application workshop. Students apply. There's no minimum GPA. They don't need SAT scores, but if they have them, they can use them for placement. And that's kind of it in terms of applying to RV. We do have a fairly decent number of students who are kind of pursuing both tracks. They're applying to some four-year schools. They also apply to RV and get that application done. And they decide later in the spring of senior year which one they're going to choose, perhaps based on how they're feeling at the time, perhaps based on where they got in, based on what the tuition bills are going to look like at the different schools. They'll make their choices in the end. So I do have a fair number of students that are kind of following both tracks simultaneously. Sending those four-year apps out in the fall and then also putting in an RV app and deciding a little bit later. Some of those kids are also good RVCC Honors College applicants as well, and you'll see that information here. It is important to know that students who are in the top 15% at the end of junior year or the end of senior year qualify for something called the NJ STARS program, which is a tuition-free community college experience. So they can do 2 years at RVCC for free. And then they can take that to some of the New Jersey four-year schools as well and kind of get a discount on years 3 and 4 there as well. Top 15% for us at the junior year. This year, it was about 99.5. I would say it varies depending on year between about like a 99 and a 101, kind of depending on where the GPAs are in a given year. But that gives you an idea about what we have kind of going to RVCC. Where you might be able to save some money. Also, it's important to know that for families where your income is now below $100,000 a year, you are eligible for the Community College Opportunity Grant at RVCC, which enables you to also attend using need-based aid without any tuition and fees as well. So that's another great benefit for families who are kind of falling into that income bracket, and a good reason to include RV on your list. Now, going forward, we're going to talk about the four-year application process and what those schools are looking at. So when do we apply? First of all, we don't apply until next year. Don't need to be doing anything now. We need to be building college lists now. But next year, students are going to fill out applications. These are just some of the application forms that are out there. They're going to have to fill something out. We'll go over it when it's time. And then what are schools looking at? First and foremost, the academic record. That's what they care about. They want to know, how are you as a student? And the best indicator of that is how you've done in your 4 years of high school. So they're going to pull out that transcript and they're looking at a lot of different things. Contrary to what students think, their little eyes are not going straight to the GPA field. That's really not so important because it's really just kind of like a constructed number based on how we weight different courses, right? So it doesn't tell you a ton, at least not the weighted GPA. They're really much more concerned with what classes you took in terms of what subjects they are, how rigorous are they, how related are they to the thing that you want to major in, what raw grades did you get in those actual courses. What is the trend of your grades overall within certain subjects, et cetera? How does that relate to what you want to major in? What did you take compared to what is available at our high school? They do receive a school profile that gives them some context about our high school, lets them know what things we offer at the accelerated level so they can kind of see where you fall amongst that. For each school, they're going to have minimum and recommended requirements. So they might say, we at minimum require 2 years of the same foreign language, but we recommend that students study it for 4 years, or we recommend 4 years of social studies. So it's different depending on different schools. Also, it's important to know that Hillsborough does not release rank for admission. So that's not a part of something we're going to send out. That being said, I think sometimes it's hard for students and families to get a sense of where they are compared to their peers here. So I want to kind of give you a little bit of information. So for right now, for students, when they look at in junior year, when they look at their transcript, they're seeing a GPA as of the end of their sophomore year. So that is the number they see there. Where they're going to find that, and I'll go forward just so I can show you. Here's a little transcript. The cumulative GPA is down here in the bottom right-hand corner. It is not over here. It's not up here. It's down here. And that is the GPA right now that is between freshman and sophomore years. It is going to update in February when we're going to add our semester 1 grades to our junior year. And it is going to update again at the end of the year when these grades are finalized. And this, what you see in front of you, is what colleges are going to get when students apply, as long as that school requires a transcript. More to come. So this is what they're looking at. So the cumulative weighted GPAs are kind of down there in the right corner. In terms of kind of where do our students fall, right now the juniors, the average weighted GPA amongst the junior class has, after the end of sophomore year, is 91.6 or so. So students in that 91 range, you're right around in the middle of our class. Our highest GPA is around 106. The top quarter of the class is around a 97. Top 15%, so that NJ STARS number I was just talking about for free RVCC, that number is currently rattling around in the upper 98s. Those numbers are, for the most part, going to go up at the end of this year. Especially, I would say it stretches out because the students who are taking more honors and AP courses, their GPAs kind of weighted GPAs go up naturally because they're getting more weighting in their courses. So what we'll typically see is after junior year, the average is somewhere around a 92, maybe a little above. That top 25% and everything up kind of shoves up maybe about a point. So probably going to go from around a 97 for the top quarter of the class to around a 98. That top 15%, that magic NJ STARS number is probably going to be upper 99s or around 100. So those kind of move up. So that kind of helps students contextualize where they live a little bit. Schools don't get exactly this information. What they do get is they get a school profile that gives them kind of a bar chart that shows them kind of relative idea about how many students fall in different areas of our GPA range. So they can get an idea of maybe around where a student falls within our class if that's important to them. Schools are also care about a student's senior year schedule. And that time is coming. We will be doing scheduling very soon. I anticipate program of studies available at the end of the month. We will be talking to students in about the first or second week of February about what's available next year and doing course selections. Course selection will start mid-February, and then we'll start meeting with them a little bit later in February. It's going to be a little bit, maybe a week or so behind where we were last year. What is really, really important is that a student have a balanced and maintainable schedule. Sometimes I see students go whole hog on this whole idea of course rigor, and they're like, stack me up with all the accelerated classes. And I'm like, just because we can doesn't mean we should, right? Because you need to live with that schedule for 10 months. And so you're thinking like, oh, but they're just seeing that on my transcript there. They see I'm taking all those APs. That's great. Well, that's great until February 10th when I need to send out mid-year grades. And then it ain't so great if those grades aren't good because you kind of undid everything by not doing well in those classes. So yeah, they care about rigor, but when they're talking about rigor, they want to see you challenge yourself, but they also want to see you be successful. So it's not just about taking the class, it's about doing well in the class as well. So that's really important. I encourage students in senior year to remember that like they're doing a lot of things. It's not just what's in the classroom. So you need to be successful in the classroom, but now we're juggling extracurriculars, we're juggling work, we're juggling college applications. We don't want to drop those balls. So we don't want to have worked all this time, and that's when we just kind of start falling apart, either in terms of academics or just in terms of like being able to keep it together. It's a lot on a 17-year-old. So it's really important that they are picking a schedule that they can live with for the duration of the year. We really want them to kind of settle in on that. They should be intentional about what they pick. What they pick is hopefully for them going to be what they get. And it's not going to be that changeable. So students should not assume, well, I can just change it next year, because not so much. And the longer we go into the year, the harder it is to kind of make any changes. The goal is not for students to try things and then drop them in October or November, because we got to notify the colleges they applied to. So that, their selections are really important for them. It's a great time right now to start researching college requirements around, I would say, math. However, I really feel strongly that all students should take a fourth year of math, but it's important to know that in some states, a fourth year of math is actually required for college entry. So North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Massachusetts all kind of come to mind. They require 4 years of math across the board. Some schools require a minimum number of lab sciences, or for certain majors, they require that you have taken certain courses. You know, some majors require chemistry, some majors require physics. So you want to check on that stuff now. Check on years of foreign language required or recommended. It's a good time to check on that one too. Just to make sure that you're scheduling what you need for next year, because don't assume, oh, I can just change it in August, because that reality is that often is not possible, given the number of students we have and the number of spaces we have in classes. So should not plan for that. All right, so we talked about the GPA, we talked about the transcript. One key note: make a note on your calendar now for the last day of school. Go into your little Google Calendar or whatever you got on your phone and make a little event for yourself to download a copy of my kid's transcript as of the end of junior year. And that is because by I feel like it's like only a few days later. So whatever day report cards release, transcripts are also there. Download it that day. Because within a couple of days of that, transcript access comes down, and it's down for the whole summer. And students will be really glad if they had a copy of this, because it will let them start to move forward with some parts of the college application process. They can work on self-reporting of grades and things like that throughout the summer if they've got a copy of this. So super important for them to do that. I send out a reminder at the end of the year, but put it on your calendar now. All right, let's talk about testing a little bit. So I mentioned before, testing is not required everywhere. It's kind of a different world. We've got 3 terms that are real common. We got test required, which is exactly what it says, required. I threw Purdue in there. They're going to say recommended, but like 92% of their accepted students had test scores. So like that's required, right? So now we see who's requiring it right now. That could change. As I mentioned earlier, policies for the class of 2026 are often not announced yet. Some of these schools are going to kind of evaluate that a little bit later in the process. Once they've finished reviewing all their regular decision kids for this year, maybe we'll start to get some of those decisions around March, April. Right now, pretty much everybody else is test optional. Sometimes there's a minimum GPA. Coastal Carolina, I'm talking to you, in order to be test optional. And then we've got the ones down at the bottom there. We've got some test blind friends. And actually, I should have moved Caltech. I forgot. They moved back up to test required. So that's a little crazy to me, going from none to all. But that's what we're talking about. But these other schools, UC system, that's not changing. That's the University of California system. That's not changing. These other schools down there, they're not going back. But there are a few that they don't consider them at all. Most of them are falling in this test optional. Rutgers, I don't know that they've announced for next year yet. I'd personally be a little surprised if they go back to test required, but I guess it is possible. I do really encourage any student that is looking at applying to apply to four-year schools to test at least once, and starting in your junior year. They want to keep those options open. Test, see where you are, and then make decisions based on that. By the time we get like March scores back, I think you're going to have a better idea as to who's going to be required and optional, and you can kind of decide where you're going to go from there by about that point in time. And students can decide where they're going to send their scores. It's not just because I took it, I have to send them everywhere. It is like I can decide I'm going to send my scores to the University of Delaware, and I am going to apply test optional to Rutgers. Like that's okay. Students can decide that. So just having scores doesn't mean that they're now forced to disclose those scores to every school that they have applied to. So they'll make those decisions, and they'll make those decisions next year. And I help students, and the counselors help students to determine, like, is this a good place to send them, or would I be better off to apply test optional? Because it can be a difficult decision. SAT and ACT are both fair game. SAT is digital now. ACT is paper or digital. I don't honestly have a good sense as to what the local ACT sites are doing in terms of paper or digital. And who's doing what. We are not an ACT testing site at Hillsborough. These are kind of the next test dates. Registration for these are still available. I would encourage students to go ahead and register for those March, May, June SATs. If they're looking at those dates, dates do fill up and test sites do fill up. You do not need to test at Hillsborough High School. You can test at any available school that is on there. So don't feel like you got to come to Hillsborough, but know that, sites do fill up. I feel like the hardest date, if you're planning ahead and planning on an August test date in your family, I would also mark on your calendar in the beginning of May to start looking for emails from me, periodically checking the College Board website to see if that August test date is opened up yet. Those August test dates fill up very, very early. They are very limited because it's August and nobody has started school, and it's really hard for schools to staff that. A lot of sites, including us, do not test in August. Students typically testing in August, many students have to travel up to an hour, hour and a half into Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New York to find testing dates. And some of those students are coming to New Jersey to test. So August can be a tough time to find a testing date. I think what I really want you to know, though, is that testing is definitely not the be all end all. I find that academic record, as like on the student's transcript, is a far better indicator to me of who's going to be accepted to a school. By and large, schools would put a lot more weight on that transcript and that full academic record than they are on a performance on an exam. Does it mean it's not helpful and it's a waste of time? No. Good scores, high scores are always going to be helpful to a kid. I'm not going to lie. If I've got two students who are both kind of below the academic GPA profile, but one of them has sky high school scores, that might be enough to get them in. I'm not going to lie. But if one student has a higher academic record and then that we got the lower one with the sky high scores, that is often not enough. I can tell you at Rutgers, that's often not enough. There's another term on here called super scoring I just want to point out. So super scoring is about taking the best evidence-based reading and writing score and the best math score and putting them together to get the best total score. So many schools do that, but not all. So like Penn State does not do that. They use the best single test state, the military academy's best single test state. So that's the score you got on one day when you walked in the door and took that test, as compared to a math from here and evidence-based reading and writing from there. More schools are super scoring the ACT, but not all schools do. So that's important to know too, if you're going the ACT route. Then we've got test prep. I would say that the first thing I really encourage families to think about, and the first thing I'm thinking about, I've got a kid that's a sophomore, so I'm not too far behind you all, is kind of the time and money investment versus the likelihood of the score improvement to where it would need to be helpful to your kid, right? So I've got a pretty good sense of, where my own kid's GPA is. I think I've got a pretty good idea about where he could score. And now it's kind of a matter of determining, what's the likelihood of it going up that much, right? And so, if we put, how much money are we going to put in to get it to go that much? How much time is he going to spend in order to get it to go up that much? What I'm sometimes seeing is students' families that are plunking down sometimes a lot of money for test prep and then applying to 9 out of their 10 schools test optional. In which case you didn't even use that score. Sometimes they're putting in a ton of money into test prep and applying to every single school test optional because frankly, their academic record is still much better than their test record. And so their academic record is more helpful to them at admissions and they're better off going without. So you really kind of got to think about that honestly, and whether that's going to be helpful when we move into that land. You're also going to have to consider where your kid's applying and are those places that are, going to remain test optional for them as well. But something to think about if you're thinking about kind of some summer test prep. But there's lots of other things students can do to prep. College Board, Khan Academy. There's something called Schoolhouse or something like that is free test prep that is online on College Board, Khan Academy stuff. There's a lot of apps out there. In terms of how to prep, there's private tutors. I see kids take test prep classes. Virtual is much more popular than it used to be, but I encourage students and families to be real honest with how engaged that particular student is going to be in a virtual test prep environment. I could tell you with my own sophomore, never, ever never ever will I put him in a virtual test prep environment. He will sit there, the earbuds are going to be in, and we're not learning. So if he does test prep, he's going to be in person. That's a better route for him. But so real honest, in general, test prep, what they get out of it is what they put into it. So if they're just going through the motions and just doing what they're doing in the class and nothing more, like you're not going to see a whole lot going on. A lot of what test prep is like rote and repetition. It is learning how to take the test, and really kind of like cramming and forgetting is what happens in terms of SAT and ACT test prep. Next piece of the application that is kind of a big one out there is the college essay. We do work with students in the CP and above English courses. It is built into the 11th grade English curriculum to work on the main college essay. So they choose a prompt, usually from the Common Application, and they write towards it. I feel like the earliest I've ever seen that happen is probably March. I feel like most of the classes hold it off until like May or June. In a lot of classes, it's kind of the last assignments, and AP English, it is after the AP exam. They will learn about essays, they will write their essays, they will do peer review on essays, they will submit their essays. Hey, most of them get great grades on their essays. I would also say that should hardly ever be a student's finished product. So I get super nervous when I see them write those things, not touch them again. And then they send it to me on like October 20th, 10 days before their deadline. I'm like, hey, can you review it? And I see at the top that their name is up there, the header is still up there. And the last time that the document was edited was June. That never means good things, because the student really needs to do a lot more reflection on that essay. It could be a great starting point for students, but there's usually a lot more revision to be done to get it to be submission worthy, I would say. So I would take that as a fantastic starting point for what this essay could become, or what I don't want my essay to become. Maybe I wrote an essay and I realized later, like, maybe I needed to write that, but this does not need to be my college essay. That's not kind of what I want to represent me. I want to pick something else, but hopefully it gives them more direction for having done it. My best essay resource out there is hands down collegeessayguy.com. He's got 5 million, I feel like, free resources. I use them all the time. He does fantastic webinars for students and parents. There's paid stuff on there too that students can do and that parents can do, but the free resources alone are fantastic. I use them all the time. Students will often write additional essays as well, other essay topics that are required, and then supplemental essays. And those supplemental essays are specific to the school, whereas their main essay is really kind of like something they're using probably for all of their schools with no or minimal modifications. Their supplemental essays are specific if they need them. Not all schools need them, and some kids don't have to write any, but they're very specific to that institution. Super important overall that essays are written by the student. Yes, we can tell when it's written by a parent. You can very much tell the difference between my writing and my kids, even when I'm trying to write like him. You can tell when it's AI. Yes, colleges can check, are those things super accurate? Not really, but you're starting to sniff that this essay looks super good and their English grades and their history grades are not super good. That kind of makes me think maybe this kid didn't write it. So we kind of really got to prove across that application as well. There's some kind of red flags in terms of language and things like that. Sometimes I'll even say when I'm commenting, like, is this how you normally talk? Because I don't feel like this is authentic to a 17-year-old. This doesn't sound right when I'm reading those essays. And I do work with students and can do some review on essays, but I encourage students to, use other resources as well, because there's only one of me. Will a wonderful essay get a student into a college? In and of itself, no, I really don't feel like it will. Can it tip the scale in a student's direction when they're kind of in the ballpark academically and we're differentiating amongst qualified applicants? Yes, of course it can. It's a great way for a student to be able to have their own voice in the college essay. And also you'll find that essays topics are very different from what they used to be. They're really less of a personal statement, not the why I want to go to this school. That's not what the main college essay is anymore. It's really kind of a snapshot of the student and what's important to them. And they'll find a way to kind of write about that in a way that works for them. And that's part of that, kind of process that they do in the English course, is starting to assess that out. And I really do encourage a student, though, to stay kind of with what's comfortable to them in terms of writing style. We're not all the most creative writer out there who can find, like we've got a lunchbox, and the sandwich represents this part of me, and the apple represents this part of me. Not everybody's a writer like that. And students don't have to feel like they need to kind of go down that road if that's not them. They really need to be true to themselves with writing style. And the teachers will talk about different kinds. They shouldn't feel like they need to adopt something just because that's what they see online. They can choose a different writing style if it's more comfortable to them. Because what we're looking for is really authentic essays, authentic to their writing style, and also authentic to who they are. That's really what's most important, I would say, in the college essay. And that can really and truly be felt when you're reading a student's essay. Next up, we've got letters of recommendation. They're another part of the application process for some schools. So we're going to talk about this a lot with students in counseling groups, kind of the letter of recommendation process. So I'm not going to go too deep into the process of how it works and how you ask and what they need to do. I want to kind of talk about it on a greater sense. So it's important to know that not all colleges will take letters of recommendation for your kid when they apply. Rutgers, Penn State, University of Pittsburgh, some of the other big ones, letters of recommendation are not a part of their process. It is application, essay, self-reported grades, test scores if they got them, and that's it. No letters of rec, nothing else coming into the process. But we do tell students they really need to prepare that they're going to apply to some places that are going to need letters. So they're going to kind of prepare for that. As school counselors, our school counselors write letters of recommendation for their students. They don't need to write recommendations for all students because some students wind up not applying to places that need those. And, we may defer to the teacher letters for teachers who might have a better or stronger relationship with them because they've seen them every day, right? Or, just kind of depends where a student is applying. But they will write a recommendation for every student that needs them. They do collect some information from them to kind of help that process. Parents, there's a piece of that in there for you as well that we kind of work on. We've got a survey in there for parents to give some input. We get some other input from the students. We'll go over the details with them. Then students also, we encourage them to ask for 2 teacher letters of recommendation. And so a teacher in college admission world is not just someone who is happens to be employed as a teacher. That does not count as a teacher letter. It's someone that had that student in their course. That is a teacher letter. So the baseball coach who is also a teacher and the kid was never in the class, that's not a teacher letter for schools that are looking for teacher letters. The baseball coach who was also their teacher, that's a great teacher letter because they know them in 2 different ways. So that's a really good one to ask. We encourage students to ask for 2. What we generally find is that schools will take somewhere between 0 and 2. I feel like it's really, really important for students to not go wild here and be asking for 4, 5, 6 letters of recommendation. 1, they're not needed. 2, they're never going to get to read them. 3, they all say the same thing. They're not adding any context. We're not going to get to use them. So some of those are never going to get to be sent. And teachers are then spending time writing letters for letters that aren't even going to get used in the process. And that actually takes away from other letters that they're able to write for other students who need a letter. So it's important that students kind of stay within that too. If they're looking and they find that some school is very specific, sometimes they might need to add a 3rd. There's a couple of schools that are very specific as to who that letter needs to be from. We get it. It happens on occasion. But by and large, they should really be going for that too. We encourage students to really focus towards junior year teachers, they're preferred. That's not possible for everybody, but that's a good, kind of starting point for students to think of. They'll be asking this spring, so they should start to think about this, and we'll talk about it more with them in our groups with them. I said before, what's a teacher letter, what's not. I will say that less selective schools, sometimes you can skate by with non-academic teacher letters or non-academic letters, and they're okay with that. I do encourage them to get at least then 1 from a classroom teacher. They need that perspective in there somewhere. But the more selective schools are really clear that they need to be teachers, and they need to be teachers from academic disciplines. So that's English, math, social studies, science, world language. Yes, comp sci falls within math. That'll be fine. Business does not fall into one of those areas. Music does not fall into one of those areas. So for music, unless you're applying to, a highly competitive school to a music major, it ain't going to cut it. So they need to be careful about where those letters are coming from and thoughtful about it so they get what they need in the process. What else counts? Extracurriculars. We've talked about this in kind of early college planning, students getting involved. What are they doing outside of the classroom? How are they demonstrating leadership, work experience? They're going to have the opportunity to put all of that on their application in an activity section and express that. And I work with them on how to do that as we get into the summer and the early fall, how to lay that out. For some schools, audition and portfolio is part of their process, depending on what major a student's applying to. Recruited athletes, I'm not going to lie, we've got sports at a lot of schools. Being a recruited athlete can help a student get in. How a student applies, early decision, early action, regular decision, that could affect whether they get in or their chances of admission. Some schools care about demonstrated interest, which is how much I've shown interest in this school. And how can we show interest? Visiting, opening emails, attending online programs, reaching out to schools. This does not mean you need to become a pest. Most of them, it's just that you've kind of shown some interest, as opposed to being what they'll call a stealth applicant. And a stealth applicant is someone who they never hear from, never requested any info from them, isn't on their mailing list, and then all of a sudden applies on January 15th for a January 15th deadline. Like that kid, that's a stealth applicant. They have no idea if this kid is going to come there. So sometimes a little squirrely about, am I going to offer this kid a spot because they just applied at the last minute? They've not shown any interest. I don't know anything about them, etc. Some schools care about that. Some schools don't. But, I recommend students, demonstrate some interest if a school cares about that. Some schools care about legacy. Some don't. Rutgers doesn't care. Penn State doesn't care. It's not a part of their process. Some other schools do care. And then institutional priorities. There's a lot about this process that you can't control. You'll never know about it. They don't tell you about it. They don't tell you always what they're looking for. You don't know, hey, they're looking to grow this department because they just hired a new professor, or they're looking to shrink this department because they kind of think that they might wind up canceling that major entirely, or they haven't gotten enough students in the last 2 years from the Southwest part of the United States. You can't control that stuff. You don't know anything about it. You don't know that they just lost their soccer goalie, so they need one of those. There's a lot here that a student can't impact. It's not necessarily, I would say, always viewed as the most fair process. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, as it's not really designed to be fair to all. There's people in there who have a larger advantage than others in the process. And that might be you at a different school. It just depends very much upon the individual school. I mentioned a little bit before, we talked about early decision being a binding process. This is just kind of a little bit more information about it for those that are looking for that. I don't feel like you need to kind of get into this level of detail and worrying about which one I'm going to do with which plan at this point in time. I just try to kind of nail home early decisions, the binding one. You should be pretty sure you can pay for it. And I'm kind of giving you some information about how to forecast your ability to pay. My big pro tip is to start looking at net price calculators. And I'll talk about that when we move on into financial aid in a second, to start to look at what's going to be affordable to your family. But this is kind of an overview of what those things are. We'll work on it with the kids, and we'll talk about it with them. It'll come out in some summer stuff and then in the fall as well. So that's when we need to worry about that stuff a little bit more in detail. And this is kind of your overall time frame. We got stuff we're going to do this spring. We're going to write essays. We're going to request teacher letters. Kids are going to take SATs. We talked about all those things. This point, they're building that list. It's not on here, but honestly, the single most important thing they could do this year is be successful in the classroom. Those junior year grades are front and center in that college application process. It's the most recent coursework schools are going to see. It's the thing they care about it a lot. Are the other 2 years important? Yes, Absolutely. But we want to see even trends. Students going to stay the same. Students going to improve. Those things are great. We don't want to see big drop-offs in the junior year. They're going to wave flags that weren't previously there. So that's, really, really important too, is be successful in the courses that they're in. And then this kind of gives you an idea of what happens when the rest of the way. And you'll see summer is there. And I encourage students to try to use that time to get a little bit ahead, to kind of make their fall a little bit easier. And don't worry, we do communicate with them a lot as we go through the spring and as we head into the summer, so that they have some summer goals and can make some progress if they've got the time to do that over the summer, which, as I mentioned, can kind of really free things up for them for during the year. I have started to get some questions, and I always get questions about like, hey, do you recommend anybody as a private counselor? Sometimes I can give you someone who might be a good fit, or, based on what other students have recommended, I give you a list of some people. Important to know, though, if you're looking to hire someone outside, it's okay, really. You can be honest with us. Students should not feel like they need to like hide that from us or lie. You're still going to get the same services from us, even if you're, using somebody from outside. If that is what is best for your family to work with someone, great. Things I encourage you to do, though: look for the qualifications that they have and their commitment to the profession. I like to see, I think it's most productive when people use professionals that like, this is what we do for a living, as opposed to, hey, I helped my own kid and their friend get into school. I find that person doesn't have the kind of deep knowledge that makes your money worth it. So if you're paying, you want to pay for someone with a lot more knowledge than you have on your own, right? Someone that meets your own needs. So some of them do some services only, like just essay help. Others do kind of the whole kit and caboodle. They will, help you build. Some work just on list building. Some are going over every single line in the application with you and making sure you hit every button and setting all the timelines. The more they do, the more it costs, which is probably kind of obvious. Some red flag, if they're not taking into account how your kid relates to schools at our high school and what past results were from our high school, that's a red flag to me. I find those results, when I find that out at the end of the process, the student was doing something, they're like, hey, my consultant said I'd be good at all those schools. And I'm looking and I know they're not going to be, because I know how it usually goes at our school. I've been, kind of around the block a few times. And then those results are kind of what I thought they would be. That was a big red flag, that kid was probably in trouble. So look for people that are going to take that into account, that they're asking to see, can I see your school score account? Can I see the scattergrams? Can I see your school's profile? They should be asking for that kind of stuff if they're helping you kind of with that list building part of the process. And overall, I tell students, like, you're paying for that advice, use it. Don't take their advice and then shop around. Don't use your essay advisor and then shop it to your English teacher, 6 friends and me, because you know what? We're all going to tell you something different. But that person you were paying to work with as an essay writer, they took the time to really brainstorm with you and draft and all those kinds of things. Like, there was a whole process that went into that, and it was very intentional. And when you're shopping it around, you're really diluting the quality of the product that you worked on with them. And then you can't opt out of our process here. Now, that being said, I talked about this. You're like, why is she even talking about this? Do I have to do this? No, not at all. I would say, my best estimate is probably under 10% of our students are using someone, but for some, it is the right way to go. And if that's what you're going to do, I just want you to make some good decisions so that is a good value from your money and you get out of it what you were looking for. So where's the parent in this process? Parents, you're not driving the car. You are their trusted advisor. You are in the back seat yelling at them, not that they're going over the line on the right. That's you. That's what you're doing here. So you're trying to advise them. You're trying to keep them on track. You're giving them some guardrails. Like, you need to be giving them some guardrails about price, distance, things like that. Try to keep them from making the really big mistakes. Following up with them, checking on them. But you don't want to do for them. This is a really good place for them to take some ownership. This is kind of a good, important place for them to take some steps in self-sufficiency. I think it's really important to trust them. Like I said, check up on them, but they got to be able to fill out their application. They got to be able to complete the fields of the application. Now, might you sit with them and go over it with them and make sure everything's good? Sure, go for it. You don't need to be in there doing their Common App for them. If they don't know their home address, You shouldn't be looking to pay $80,000 a year for them to go to college. They got to know that kind of information about themselves. They're going to need help on the place that asks, where's my parent work? Where do they go to college when they graduate? They need help with that. That's fine. But again, where did I go to high school? What classes am I taking now? They can fill that stuff in. And we need to empower them to do that kind of stuff on their own, because when they get to college, they're not talking to you folks, parents. They want the money from you. They want you to pay the bill, but the kids got to do all the work there. So better to have them start doing it now, where you can support them, teach them how to navigate the emailing of colleges, the making phone calls piece, teach them how to do that stuff so they're ready to do it on their own. And that's, a great spot for you. And I'll have tips for you as we go into the fall about how to kind of do that without this becoming like the source of aggravation in your house. How do you follow up without becoming like the world's most naggy mom, which a lot of us have been accused of doing, I'm sure, right? You don't want to become that, but how do you kind of still make sure they're doing what they're doing while not checking their email for them and kind of keeping that boundary line? So we'll talk about that a little bit as we head into next year, and they're starting to do lots of little detailed things and how to help them. So now money, financial aid, how much this whole thing costs, more than any of us would like. Probably makes you want to cry, because I know it does for me. But these are some current figures of what I would call, these are the direct costs. So the amount of money that you paid to the school, tuition, fees, and then I threw room and board in here for most of these schools as well, as if a student's going to live on campus. There's another figure out there called cost of attendance. That also factors in other indirect expenses, which are not costs paid directly to the school. That's like books, supplies, transportation, and usually they'll have like a catch-all personal miscellaneous expenses. So like if I Google cost of attendance for Rutgers, New Brunswick, it's probably more like 38,000, but 33 is the amount that's like on the tuition bill before any financial aid's applied. You see, this varies very widely. You'll see there's, privates are more towards the top. A lot of the out-of-state publics are somewhere in this range. That's pretty common for them. The in-state publics are mostly in the 30s or so. There are some that are not in this upper 50s range. So West Virginia, some of the larger schools down south, like LSU, some of those other ones, some like University of Tampa is not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's still expensive, but they're a little bit lower, and you kind of get an idea. Again, remember what I said earlier, though, about the first job of schools is to service the residents of their state. So it's important to know that the most financial aid for students will come from their home institutions if they've got those, and also the private institutions. There are some out-of-state schools out there that do offer some pretty good scholarships for out-of-state students. In particular, I would say Ohio State is notable for me as a really good scholarship school for students. SUNY Binghamton gives some good scholarships. University of Maryland, not as much. I don't see a whole lot of scholarships coming out of there. So it really depends upon the school, but know that, you really have to be, I would say, at the top of the applicant pool for many of these out-of-state schools in order to get scholarships from them. A lot of the private institutions kind of discount to many people, but not all. Seton Hall, they give great money. I feel like almost everybody that gets in there gets a solid 15 grand or more. Lehigh, they're a little bit more needs-based than merit-based, I would say. And NYU, everything they do is need-based financial aid. They're not giving merit-based. Northeastern does give it merit-based. It depends on the school a little bit. So now let's talk about those need-based and merit-based things. So merit-based is like scholarships. That's based on what a student's done. Maybe their GPA, academic record, test scores, leadership, other things, depends on the schools. You get merit scholarships where you're a strong applicant for the most part. So the higher you are, the better chance you are of getting money from them. At most schools, if it's a reach school for you, you should probably not count on getting merit aid from them. On your probable schools, you really should probably be getting merit aid from many of them. Private universities have mostly very generous and attainable merit aid for the schools that offer that. The vast majority of them do offer that. As I mentioned, some out of states give money, but most don't, or they don't give a whole lot. And then we've got need-based aid. And so need-based aid is based on how much they think you have and how much they think you can afford, which may or may not represent reality. So these are the different types of aid that are really out there in terms of, kind of need-based aid. There's federal aid, and that's where we'll complete the FAFSA. You've heard that word maybe. That's something we will do next year, and I'll talk about it in just a second, but just at a very high level. There's state aid that is also kind of FAFSA based. And I've given some indications here for our families who are not currently U.S. citizens or permanent residents. They may be in other statuses. I've kind of given the breakdown here of what types of aid your family would be eligible for. Most of our families, if you're middle of the road Hillsborough, I would say you need to focus here on three. Institutional aid, schools that have their own money to give you. Because if you are middle of the road Hillsborough, you're really not going to qualify for Pell Grants and other federal or state grants. Everybody qualifies for federal loans. So spoiler alert, you fill out the FAFSA, you'll get federal loans, but it's limited to $5,500. And I really find that most of our kind of middle of the road families, like that's all they get. Do we have families in Hillsborough they're getting more than that, from others? Absolutely. But just know that a lot of people are not as well. And then you see there's kind of the outside find your own aid sort of money of filling the gap in. But I really try to deter students from relying on number 4 here. We really want to rely on making a list that includes some places that it will be affordable for my family and including places on there that are going to give me money for what I've done to bring that cost down, because the find your own money option ain't great. Outside scholarships, I often find students spend a lot more time applying than benefit they get out of getting them, because oftentimes they don't get any, or they get kind of low amounts, and they in fact would have been better spending that same amount of time working, because they would have had guaranteed money in that time and probably would have come out with more money. So, and you don't find out about these things until real late in the process. So outside scholarships are often, the balance of them, the bulk of them are really available to seniors only. And those are often not awarded until like May and June of the senior year, which is after they've decided where they're going. So you really can't bank on like, this is what's going to have to help me pay, because you need to pick where you're going before you even find out if you got any. So you really got to be kind of focusing on the other things up here. I did mention the FAFSA. There's kind of 2 financial aid applications out there. I just want to show you their names really. I think the only important things to know, pretty much everybody makes you do the FAFSA if you want to be considered for need-based aid. And, I do encourage everybody to file. You're not required to. Some schools also use this other application. The time to do these is next year. So you're not going to be filling out any financial aid applications at this point in time. It's too early. It's not for you. It's for the kids that are seniors right now. My important thing to know about the FAFSA is whose info you're going to have to provide. So, this is a big one for divorced and separated families. For the FAFSA, you provide info for the person that provides the most financial support for the student, regardless of who has custody. So that doesn't make a difference. And so if a student is living with their mother, but dad provides the most financial support and dad is remarried, dad and dad's current spouse are what goes on the FAFSA. So these are important things to consider. For the CSS profile, I kind of mentioned divorced and separated parents, many of the schools that require the CSS profile require both of the families to provide their info, so potentially up to 4 parents there. So I mention this now because for some families, depending on their situation, they take this kind of thing into account when they're list building. In terms of, hey, maybe due to our situation, maybe it's best for me to kind of avoid CSS profile schools because, we don't want to supply all of that information. So that's just to the level that I would say you need to kind of think about it now. Again, we'll be applying in the fall. What can we do now? This is the stuff you can focus on now. Net price calculators. If you Google like Fairfield University net price calculator, it'll take you to the site. You can plug in some basic information about your family's finances, basic information about your kid, and it'll give you a ballpark figure as to how much you can, should probably plan on having to pay them and what types of aid you might get. It's a real good ballpark. I encourage families to do that for maybe an in-state public, an out-of-state public, private or two. I wanted to cry. I mentioned Fairfield. I did that. And my husband's like, you got to be kidding me. But, that's kind of, what to anticipate. Now we know that going into my own kids' search. So I encourage you, now is a great time to do those. If your kid winds up thinking about early decisioning, I absolutely tell them they need to do that net price calculator before you sign the early decision agreement when the kid applies. And that's because when they get in, they get the financial aid package. If you've done that net price calculator, and I say PDF that thing when you're done, because next December, if they get in and that aid package looks nothing like what you thought it was, you have a starting point for a conversation at least. At least did your homework with the net price calculator. So I really encourage them to do that. These are some other things you can do. You can kind of Google, there's a federal student aid estimator that can give you an idea about, whether you can expect to get federal aid, et cetera. So you'll get those links in the presentation, and you can also just Google for them. They pop right up. There's a full financial aid video that from a program we did in December, and we'll do another one next fall. When we do it varies depending on when the FAFSA opens up. I kind of try to dovetail that based on the schedule of the financial aid forms being open. But we will do it again next year for your class. And, we kind of talked about the rest of this a little bit. I do think it's really important to be pretty open about financial expectations heading into this. There's nothing kind of worse than a student heading full steam into this list of, expensive places, and then the rug gets pulled out for that underneath them in April when they find out that, like, hey, none of these are actually doable, and the kid is heartbroken. So the time to have those conversations is now, and to really make that list around whatever your family's financial, needs are individually. So that kind of wraps us up in terms of our actual presentation. I do have listed for you here all of our counselors. So I know, we've had a couple of changes in the last couple of years. This makes sure that you have a view of who your kids' counselor is, who they were. They talked about their letters before, so you can kind of get that. I would definitely recommend, if you are on social media, pick me up on Facebook, on Instagram. Those are good places to kind of see what's going on. It also helps you track, especially in the fall when I'm posting things out to students. You're maybe a little bit more clued in on where else I'm providing them reminders. I let them know of opportunities and things like that there that I don't want to, necessarily be gunning out to 600 kids every time. So I am going to wrap us up here, and I will stop talking. I'm going to answer, anything else that pops in. So if you have any more questions, feel free to pop them in. And otherwise, have a fantastic evening. We're super excited to start meeting with your kids next week and to get to know you all throughout the process. Thank you.
Awesome job, baby.
All right, folks. Good night.
Night.
A couple more questions. And all my counselors, thank you so much for your help. I'll pop off the rest of these, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
Night.
Okay. For the person that asked about when we'll do the FAFSA, I'm not quite sure when that deadline is, when that's going to open up next year. Normally, in normal times, that was October 1st. The FAFSA kind of got redone last year. It was real late last year. This year was December 1st. I'm hoping we're moving back to an October 1st next year, but I'm not positive. So we'll see. I'll announce it. My Facebook handle is HHS College. You can just search it there. It's the same for both Facebook and Instagram. I've got Twitter, but I don't really use it anymore. But so there's the two I really most frequently use. Someone asked who the counselor is for V. That would be Miss Hassan. She's always at the end of the alphabet. Someone just asked, will volunteer work and work experience add any value to the application? Absolutely. So when we talk about extracurriculars, it's what is a student doing outside of the classroom? So that's clubs, sports, working, extracurriculars, managing their little brother and getting them off the bus and feeding them dinner because parents working. That stuff all goes into the application. And there's no I think it's important to know that there's not like a list of checks that a rep has on the other end when they're reading a college application. It's not like, oh, sport, check, volunteer, check, some type of honor society, check. Like, it's not like that. They're looking to see what was available to the kid, what they did, what are they passionate about? Does it make sense? Maybe did they grow into a leadership role? How, was the degree to their dedication? It's okay if kids stop doing some things and change to other things because their interests have changed. That's fine. It's important. It's part of, learning and growing that we all do as a part of high school. And, even as we become adults, right, our interests change over time, and that's okay. So sure, those things are great. They are helpful to students. I would also say at schools that I encourage students, like, what is this school about? Like, if it's schools, especially like the Jesuit institutions, they love to see service and volunteer work because that's who there's about. That's what they're all about. And that is what their that is what their students are doing when they're on campus there. They are expected and they want to do activities and service. That's part of what they're doing there. And just kind of, there's another extracurricular activity. How many are recommended to get into a top university? Well, one, I will say, I honestly do not pay any attention to a school's ranking and what is top 20, top 50. There's a really arbitrary rankings. And also there's not kind of a magic number of things. I would say students who are getting into more selective institutions have very focused lists of activities that they are deeply involved in and have made a difference in that lasts beyond their time at the institution. It is a real difference that is quantifiable. Having a very long laundry list of things often does not equate to highly selective college institution acceptance, rather, especially when it's surface level involvement. It's really deep involvement in things that make sense, I would say, is what we tend to see, and where I tend to see selective college admissions. Someone just asked who has the R's, and it looks like Mr. Torres goes up to RUF, and then Ms. Regetz picks up at the RUIs, and kind of going forward from there. So hopefully I got that one. After school, should I have something that it focuses on what a student wants to major in? I do think it's something that is nice to have. Is it not? Does every kid have that? Absolutely not. No. I do find that especially more selective schools do like to see that a student has really shown some interest in the thing that they're saying that they want to major in. So if there's something available, that can help them get in, but it's also, quite honestly, really helpful for them in terms of figuring out what it is that they really want to do, and is this something they really like. So for instance, my kid currently thinks he might want to do something around kind of like TV broadcasting, sports broadcasting. We'll see. He's 15. We'll see. But he took a class in it, and at his school, he is able to do that kind of as an extracurricular / job as well. So, that's good because it's helped him really figure out, like, yes, this is something I actually legitimately like, and not just something that like sounded good to me. He's trying it out. And so I would say that's actually how it's most helpful to him. What about passion projects? Do they help a student's application? How much? How does it compare to other aspects? Again, there is no checklist of things that a student must have. I feel like, for a while, I heard a lot more about passion projects, don't hear as much anymore. It's not necessary that a student start a nonprofit. I think students very greatly think how much they think that means in an application. At the end of the day, these are 17 and 18-year-olds. They're looking for authenticity. And that is what's, really, really important in an application. And I know sometimes students are looking to like build these whole laundry lists of all these different things. And honestly, those are not, again, often not the most successful applications because they typically lack depth and authenticity in the application process. So I really, really encourage students to stay true to who they are and who they care about, and convey that in their application. And if that is, you want to call it a passion project exhibits that, then great. But does every kid have that? Would I even say that most of our kids get into highway selectives have those? I actually would not say that most of them have those. All right, folks, I am going to wrap us up because it looks like we've kind of dribbled to an end with questions. And again, thank you so much and have a wonderful night.